Three Men in a Boat, to say nothing of the dog, by Jerome K. Jerome.
The chief beauty of this book lies not so much in its literary style, or in the extent and usefulness of the information it conveys, as in its simple truthfulness. Its pages form the record of events that really happened. All that has been done is to color them, and for this, no extra charge has been made. George and Harris and Montmorency are not poetic ideals, but things of flesh and blood, especially George, who weighs about 12 pounds. Other works may excel this in depth of thought and knowledge of human nature. Other books may rival it in originality and size, but for hopeless and incurable veracity, nothing yet discovered can surpass it. This, more than all its other charms, will, it is felt, make the volume precious in the eye of the earnest reader, and will lend additional weight to the lesson that the story teaches. London, August 1889.
Chapter 1. Three Invalids. Sufferings of George and Harris. A victim to 107 fatal maladies. Useful prescriptions. Cure for liver complaint in children. We agree that we are overworked and need rest. A week on the rolling deep? George suggests the river. Montmorency lodges an objection. Original motion carried by majority of 3-1.
There were four of us, George and William Samuel Harris and myself and Montmorency. We were sitting in my room, smoking and talking about how bad we were. Bad from a medical point of view, I mean, of course. We were all feeling quite sick and we were getting quite nervous about it. Harris said he felt such extraordinary fits of giddiness come over him at times that he hardly knew what he was doing. And then George said that he had fits of giddiness too and hardly knew what he was doing. With me, it was my liver that was out of order. I knew it was my liver that was out of order because I had just been reading a patent liver pill circular in which were detailed the various symptoms by which a man could tell when his liver was out of order. I had them all. It is a most extraordinary thing, but I never read a patent medicine advertisement without being impelled to the conclusion that I am suffering from the particular disease therein dealt with in its most virulent form. The diagnosis seems in every case to correspond exactly with all the sensations that I have ever felt.
I remember going to the British Museum one day to read up the treatment for some slight ailment of which I had a touch. Hay fever, I fancy it was. I got down the book and read all I came to read, and then, in an unthinking moment, I idly turned the leaves and began to indolently study diseases generally. I forget which was the first distemper I plunged into, some fearful, devastating scourge, I know, and before I had glanced half down the list of premonitory symptoms, it was borne in upon me that I had fairly got it. I sat for a while frozen with horror, and then in the listlessness of despair, I again turned over the pages. I came to typhoid fever, read the symptoms, discovered that I had typhoid fever, must have had it for months without knowing it, wondered what else I had got, turned up St. Vitus's dance, found as I expected that I had that too, began to get interested in my case, and determined to sift it to the bottom, and so started alphabetically, read up ague and learned that I was sickening for it, and that the acute stage would commence in about another fortnight. Bright's disease I was relieved to find I had only in a modified form, and so far as that was concerned, I might live for years. Cholera I had with severe complications, and diphtheria I seemed to have been born with. I plodded conscientiously through the 26 letters, and the only malady I could conclude I had not got was housemaid's knee.
I felt rather hurt about this at first. It seemed somehow to be a sort of slight. Why hadn't I got housemaid's knee? Why this invidious reservation? After a while, however, less grasping feelings prevailed. I reflected that I had every other known malady in the pharmacology, and I grew less selfish and determined to do without housemaid's knee. Gout, in its most malignant stage, it would appear, had seized me without my being aware of it, and I had evidently been suffering with from boyhood. There were no more diseases after them, so I concluded there was nothing else the matter with me. I sat and pondered. I thought what an interesting case I must be from a medical point of view, what an acquisition I should be to a class. Students would have no need to walk the hospitals if they had me. I was a hospital in myself. All they need do would be to walk round me, and after that take their diploma. Then I wondered how long I had to live. I tried to examine myself. I felt my pulse. I could not at first feel any pulse at all. Then, all of a sudden, it seemed to start off. I pulled out my watch and timed it. I made it 147 to the minute.
I went to my medical man.
He is an old chum of mine and feels my pulse and looks at my tongue and talks about the weather, all for nothing when I fancy I'm ill, so I thought I would do him a good turn by going to him now. What a doctor wants, I said, is practice. He shall have me. I went straight up and saw him, and he said, "Well, what's the matter with you?" I said, "I will not take up your time, dear boy, with telling you what is the matter with me. Life is brief, and you might pass away before I had finished. But I will tell you what is not the matter with me. I have not got housemaid's knee." He sat down and wrote out a prescription and folded it up and gave it me. I did not open it. I took it to the nearest chemist's. The man read it and said he didn't keep it. I read the prescription. It ran, 1 pound beefsteak with 1 pint bitter beer every 6 hours, 1 10-mile walk every morning, 1 bed at 11 sharp every night, and don't stuff up your head with things you don't understand. I followed the directions with the happy result that my life was preserved.
In the present instance, going back to the liver pill circular, I had the symptoms, the chief among them being a general disinclination to work of any kind. We sat there for half an hour, describing to each other our maladies. I explained to George and William Harris how I felt when I got up in the morning. At this point, Mrs. Poppets knocked at the door to know if we were ready for supper. We smiled sadly at one another and said we supposed we had better try to swallow a bit. This duty done, we refilled our glasses, lit our pipes, and resumed the discussion upon our state of health. The unanimous opinion was that it, whatever it was, had been brought on by overwork. "What we want is rest," said Harris. "Rest and a complete change," said George. I agreed with George and suggested that we should seek out some retired and old-world spot, far from the madding crowd, and dream away a sunny week among its drowsy lanes.
Harris said, "No, if you won't rest and change, you can't beat a sea trip." I objected to the sea trip strongly. A sea trip does you good when you are going to have a couple of months of it, but for a week it is wicked. I remember my brother-in-law going for a short sea trip once for the benefit of his health. He took a return berth from London to Liverpool, and when he got to Liverpool, the only thing he was anxious about was to sell that return ticket. Another fellow I knew went for a week's voyage round the coast. At 6, they came and told him dinner was ready. "Get me out of this," was the feeble reply. So I set my face against the sea trip. George said, "Let's go up the river." He said we should have fresh air, exercise, and quiet. Harris said, however, that the river would suit him to a T. The only one who was not struck with the suggestion was Montmorency. We were 3-1, however, and the motion was carried.
Chapter 2.
We pulled out the maps and discussed plans. Should we camp out or sleep at inns? George and I were for camping out. Slowly, the golden memory of the dead sun fades from the hearts of the cold, sad clouds. Silent like sorrowing children, the birds have ceased their song. Then we run our little boat into some quiet nook, and the tent is pitched, and the frugal supper cooked and eaten. Then the big pipes are filled and lighted, and we fall asleep beneath the great still stars, and dream that the world is young again, young and sweet as she used to be, ere the centuries of fret and care had furrowed her fair face. Harris said, "How about when it rained?" There is no poetry about Harris. Harris always does know a place round the corner where you can get something brilliant in the drinking line. Camping out in rainy weather is not pleasant. It is evening. You are wet through, and there is a good 2 inches of water in the boat.
It is difficult enough to fix a tent in dry weather. In wet, the task becomes Herculean. You follow each other round and round, swearing at one another, until the tent tumbles down in a heap. Rainwater is the chief article of diet at supper. The bread is 2/3 rainwater. In the morning, you are all 3 speechless, owing to having caught severe colds in the night. We therefore decided that we would sleep out on fine nights, and hotel it when it was wet. Montmorency hailed this compromise with much approval. To look at Montmorency, you would imagine that he was an angel sent upon the earth in the shape of a small fox terrier. But when I had paid for about a dozen chickens that he had killed, and had dragged him out of 114 street fights, then I began to think that maybe they'd let him remain on Earth for a bit longer, after all. Harris proposed that we should go out and have a smile, saying that he had found a place where you could really get a drop of Irish worth drinking.
Chapter 3.
So on the following evening, we again assembled. Harris said, Now, the first thing to settle is what to take with us. That's Harris all over, so ready to take the burden of everything himself and put it on the backs of other people. He always reminds me of my poor Uncle Podger. You never saw such a commotion as when my Uncle Podger undertook to do a job. A picture would have come home, and Uncle Podger would say, "Oh, you leave that to me." And then he would take off his coat and begin. He would send the girl out for nails, and then one of the boys after her to tell her what size to get. He would lift up the picture and drop it, and it would come out of the frame, and he would try to save the glass and cut himself. About midnight, the picture would be up, very crooked and insecure, and everybody dead beat and wretched, except Uncle Podger. "There you are," he would say, surveying the mess he had made with evident pride.
George said, "You know, we are on a wrong track altogether. We must not think of the things we could do with, but only of the things that we can't do without. I call that downright wisdom. How many people load up the boat till it is ever in danger of swamping with a store of foolish things which they think essential, but which are really only useless lumber? Throw the lumber over, man. Let your boat of life be light, packed with only what you need. A homely home and simple pleasures, one or two friends worth the name, someone to love and someone to love you, a cat, a dog, and a pipe or two." George said we won't take a tent. We will have a boat with a cover. George said that in that case we must take a rug each, a lamp, some soap, and a couple of big towels for bathing. I noticed that people always make gigantic arrangements for bathing when they are going anywhere near the water, but that they don't bathe much when they are there.
Chapter 4. Then we discussed the food question. "No oil," said George with a significant look. We had taken up an oil stove once, but never again. It oozed. I never saw such a thing as paraffin oil is to ooze. It ruined the sunset, and as for the moonbeams, they positively reeked of paraffin. For breakfast, George suggested eggs and bacon. For lunch, cold meat, but no cheese. Cheese, like oil, makes too much of itself. I remember a friend of mine buying a couple of cheeses at Liverpool. I took them back with me to London in a railway carriage. The people began sniffing, and rose up without another word and went out. A stout lady said it was disgraceful that a respectable married woman should be harried about in this way. From Crewe I had the compartment to myself, though the train was crowded. My friend's wife said, "I shall take the children and go to an hotel until those cheeses are eaten. I decline to live any longer in the same house with them." The next day, which was Friday, we got them all together and met in the evening to pack. I said I'd pack. I rather pride myself on my packing. I got the bag finished at last, and I sat on it and strapped it. "Ain't you going to put the boots in?" said Harris. I opened the bag and packed the boots in, and then a horrible idea occurred to me. Had I packed my toothbrush? My toothbrush is a thing that haunts me when I'm traveling. I had to turn every mortal thing out now. I found it inside a boot. Then George and Harris had to go with the hampers. They started with breaking a cup. Harris packed the strawberry jam on top of a tomato and squashed it, and then George trod on the butter. They eventually packed the butter in the teapot. Montmorency was in it all, of course. His ambition in life is to get in the way and be sworn at. The packing was done at 12:50. "Wake us at 6:30, George," we said.